Everyone in Cascabel told me not to take the job. They said the old man at the end of Redfield Road had buried 3 caretakers worth of patients and would bury mine too. They said he talked to horses that weren't there. They said he'd once run a county nurse off his porch with nothing but a coffee mug and a voice like a landslide. What none of them told me, what I had to learn the slow, aching way, was that a man can go quiet for 40 years and still be screaming the whole time, just at a frequency the rest of us are too comfortable to hear. I took the job because I needed the money. I stayed for a reason I still can't say out loud without my throat closing. The dog was barking when I pulled up, and that was how I knew something was wrong before I'd even shut off the engine. I'd been out to the Vance place 4 times by then, enough to know the rhythm of it. Blue, the old healer, didn't bark at me anymore. He decided sometime in the 2nd week that I was furniture, and he greeted me the way you greet a chair, with indifference and the occasional collapse against my shins. So when I heard him going at the far side of the barn, that high stuttering bark that dogs save for things that frighten them, I left the groceries on the passenger seat and I ran. My name is Delia Marsh. I was 34 that spring, newly divorced in the way that leaves you feeling like a house someone moved out of in a hurry, furniture gone, nail holes still in the walls. I'd come back to my grandmother's country because it was cheap, and because nobody there knew the shape of what had happened to me. Home care work was what I could get. A woman at the clinic had slid Emmett Vance's file across the desk with the particular flatness of someone handing you a thing they're glad to be rid of. "He's difficult," she'd said. "He won't take the meds half the time. He fired the last 3. If you can last a month, the county pays a bonus." I lasted a month. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest, that I went out there for a bonus, that I was that small when I started. I found him in the corral behind the barn, down on one knee in the dust, and my first thought, God forgive me, was that he'd finally fallen and cracked something the way old men do. He was 81. His hands shook when he held a fork. I'd built half my expectations around the idea that this man was a countdown. But he wasn't hurt. He was holding the head of a horse that wasn't dying so much as leaving, an ancient bay mare gone gray around the eyes, lying on her side with her ribs working like a bellows. And Emmett Vance, the mad cowboy, the terror of Redfield Road, the man who'd run a nurse off with a coffee mug, was bent over her with his forehead against her jaw, and he was talking to her so softly I couldn't hear the words, only the shape of them. The way you'd talk to someone falling asleep, the way you'd talk to a child you didn't want to frighten with your own fear. "Mr. Vance," I said. He didn't look up. "Get the blue halter off the post," he said, "and then be quiet." I got the halter. I didn't know why. I was quiet. The mare's name was Sugar, I'd learn later, and she was 31 years old, which for a horse is a kind of miracle and a kind of cruelty both, because it means everything that loved you when you were young is gone and you're still here holding the last of it. Emmett had raised her from a foal. He had, I would come to understand, raised almost nothing else that stayed. She died a little after 4 in the afternoon, with the light going gold and long across the corral. I've been present for human deaths, it's part of the work, and I can tell you there was no difference in the room of it. The same held breath. The same terrible, ordinary moment when the working ribs simply stop working and the animal that was a person becomes a body. Emmett stayed down in the dust with her a long time after. Blue had stopped barking. The whole ranch had gone into that thick silence that follows the departure of something. "You can go on inside," he said finally. His voice had gravel in it, but it didn't break. "Nothing more to do out here." I didn't go inside. I sat down in the dirt a few feet from him, close enough to be there and far enough to leave him the dignity of not being watched, and I stayed until the light was gone. He never thanked me for it. I didn't want him to. Something had shifted in me that I couldn't name yet, some furniture of my own scraping across a floor. That was the first thing I discovered about Emmett Vance. The whole town had a story about him, and not one of them had ever sat in the dirt with him long enough to be wrong. He didn't talk much for the first weeks, and what he did say was mostly instruction. "Feed the chickens before the heat. Don't let Blue near the road. The truck pulls left, so don't fight it." He watched me constantly at first, the way you watch a stranger you've decided not to trust, and I understood I'd read his file. I knew the 3 caretakers before me had lasted a combined 9 weeks. He was waiting for me to become the thing he expected, a person who tidied him toward death. A person who talked to him in the bright false voice people use on the old. The voice that says we both know you're already mostly gone. I didn't use that voice. Partly that was character, and partly it was that I didn't have the energy to perform anything that spring. I was too hollowed out to be cheerful. I think, looking back, that my emptiness was the first thing he trusted about me. I wasn't pretending the world was fine. Neither was he. It gave us a strange, flat ground to stand on together. I keep a notebook, a habit from the divorce. When a therapist told me to write down one true thing a day so I'd remember I still had a self that observed things. I'd started doing it out of obligation and kept doing it because it turned out I liked having proof I'd existed each day. My entries from those first weeks are short. Fed chickens. He watched, said nothing about the pie. I'd left a pie, he ate it, he didn't mention it. 3 days later there was a clean pie tin on my car hood, washed, set upside down to dry. That was his thank you note. I understood it perfectly. The house told me more than he did. You learn to read a house in my line of work. A house is a confession the owner can't stop making. Emmett's was clean in the way of a man who'd been in the military, corners squared, nothing out of place. But the walls were nearly bare. In a house lived in for 50 years, there should be an archaeology of a life, photographs, mounted things, the accumulated silt of birthdays and Christmases. His walls held almost nothing. One photo in the hall of a young man in uniform who might have been him. One framed square of paper in the kitchen I didn't look at closely at first. And one door at the end of the hall that was always closed. I'm not going to pretend I didn't wonder about the door, but I'd learned something in my own year of being a house with the furniture gone. You don't get to walk into a person's closed rooms just because you're curious about the damage. You wait to be let in or you never go. I decided I'd never go. I'd like to tell you I kept that promise. I didn't, and the not keeping of it is the middle of this story. The town's version of Emmett Vance came to me in pieces, at the feed store and the gas station, wherever people learned I was the one out at the Vance place now, and felt the need to warn or gossip or both. He'd come back from Korea wrong, they said. Wouldn't talk about it. Married a girl named Ruth, a schoolteacher, pretty, everyone loved her, and then Ruth was just gone 1 year and nobody quite knew the story, and Emmett stopped coming to town for anything but supplies. There'd been a child, some said. Others said no. He'd gotten meaner and stranger and older out there alone until he became a thing parents pointed at to frighten children. The mad cowboy. He'd chased off surveyors. He'd stood on his porch with a rifle when the power company wanted to run a line across his corner. He talked to dead horses. I want to tell you how a legend gets made, because I watched the raw material of one, and then I watched what the town did with it. A grieving man who won't perform his grief for you becomes, in the town's mouth, a dangerous one. A private man becomes a mad one. The town needed Emmett to be a story more than it needed him to be a person, because a story you can point at, and a person you might have to help. His madness was a thing they built so they wouldn't have to sit in the dirt with him. I'd been that kind of story too, briefly. Did you hear about Delia? Came back from the city, marriage fell apart, something happened. The something happened was doing a lot of work in that sentence, same as it did in Emmett's. I knew what it was to be reduced to a rumor. Maybe that's why I couldn't do to him what the town had done. The turn came on a Tuesday in the 6th week, over a broken water heater and a lie. The heater in the back of the house gave out, and Emmett went to fix it himself, because of course he did, and he couldn't. His hands wouldn't do it. I watched him try for 20 minutes, watched a man who had clearly built and mended everything he owned for 60 years defeated by a wrench he couldn't grip hard enough to turn, and I watched something in his face that was worse than grief. Humiliation. The specific horror of a capable person meeting the exact edge of their own decline. He threw the wrench, it hit the wall. And then he said, not to me, quietly, I can't do a goddamn thing anymore. And there was so much despair in it, so much of a man standing at the end of his own usefulness, that I did something I wasn't supposed to do. Caretakers keep boundaries. We're taught that. But I'd been where he was standing, the place where you look at your own life and can't find the person who used to live it. No, I said. You can't do this one thing. You did everything else for 80 years. You don't get to erase all of it because your hands quit before you did. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. Nobody, I think, had spoken to him as an equal in a very long time. Everyone either feared him or managed him. I'd done neither. I just told him the truth the way you tell it to someone you respect. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, you know how to work a pipe wrench? No. Then I'll teach you, he said. And you'll do the turning, and I'll do the knowing. Between us, we might make one whole man. We fixed the water heater together, his knowledge in my hands, and it was the first time I heard him laugh, a short, rusty sound, like a gate that hadn't moved in years. Between us, we might make one whole man. I wrote it in my notebook that night, and then I sat in my car in his driveway and cried for a while, and I couldn't have told you if it was for him or for me. Both, probably. The furniture scraping. That was the day I stopped working for the bonus. I should tell you about the closed door now, because it's coming, and because I promised you the not keeping of my promise. It was raining the night I opened it, a hard desert rain that comes maybe 4 times a year and turns the arroyos into something that can kill you. Emmett had a bad night. His heart, the doctor had warned me, was tired, and that night it stumbled badly enough that I sat up with him past 2 in the morning, and somewhere in the small hours, dosed and drifting, he said a name I didn't know. Cora, he said, Cora the gate. He said it like a man reaching for someone. He said it the way he'd talked to the dying mare. And in the morning he didn't remember saying it, or pretended not to, and I found I couldn't stop hearing it. Cora. The door was at the end of the hall. I'd walked past it 100 times. And I know what I said about not walking into a person's closed rooms. I believed it. I still believe it. But I'd sat up all night with the sound of that name, and I was tired and frightened, and I'd started, God help me, to love the difficult old man in the next room the way you love the people you take care of, which is a love with no good name for it. And the door wasn't locked. I want that on the record. He'd never locked it. Maybe that means something. Maybe a door you don't lock is a door you're waiting for someone brave enough to open. I opened it. The room was a nursery. That's the thing I couldn't make sense of, standing there in the doorway with the rain coming down and my hand still on the knob. Not a shrine, not a storeroom, not the locked museum of grief I'd half expected. A nursery. A small wooden crib against the far wall made by hand. I could see the joinery even from the door, the careful dovetails of a man who built things right. A mobile hanging above it, little tin horses, still now, furred with the dust of decades. A rocking chair. A shelf of picture books gone soft and swollen from years of dry heat. And on the wall, where the rest of the house had nothing, there was everything. Photographs. A whole life's worth, all crowded into this one sealed room as if he'd stripped the house bare to fill it. I stood there a long time. The rain on the tin roof was very loud. There was Emmett young, impossibly young, grinning with his arm around a dark-haired woman I knew must be Ruth. There was Ruth pregnant, laughing, one hand on her belly and the other swatting at the camera. There was a baby. There was the baby becoming a girl, a gap-toothed girl on a fat pony, a girl in a Sunday dress scowling at the injustice of a Sunday dress, a girl maybe 6 or 7 holding up a fish nearly as long as her arm with an expression of pure triumph. And then there weren't any more. The photographs simply stopped, the way the ones on the mare had stopped when her ribs quit. A life, and then the edge of a life. Cora, I thought, this is Cora. I didn't hear him come down the hall. For a man of 81, he could move quiet when he wanted, all those years of not wanting to be found. I turned, and he was standing in the doorway behind me, and his face. I will never forget his face. It wasn't anger. I'd have preferred anger. It was the face of a man watching a door open that he'd spent 40 years leaning against with his whole weight. Get out of there, he said, very quiet. I got out. I was already crying, which I had no right to be. It wasn't my grief, wasn't my room, wasn't my daughter on the wall. He shut the door and stood with his back to it and his hand flat against the wood, and for a long moment neither of us said anything, and the rain kept on. I'm sorry, I said. Emmett, I'm so sorry. I heard you say her name last night, and You had no right. No, I said, I didn't. And that was the truth, and I gave it to him plain, because I'd learned by then that the one thing he could not stand was to be managed, and the one thing he'd tolerate was the truth even when it cost. He looked at me for a long time. Something moved behind his eyes, some slow tectonic thing. Make coffee, he said finally. If you're going to know, you're going to know all of it, and I'm too old to tell it standing up. Her name was Cora. She was his daughter. And the framed square of paper in the kitchen that I'd never looked at closely, I looked at it that morning while the coffee percolated and Emmett lowered himself into his chair like a man made of glass, was a child's drawing. Crayon. A stick figure on a horse, a bigger stick figure beside it, and above them in the enormous careful letters of a kid just learning them. Me and Daddy. He'd framed it. Of everything in that house, it was the one thing he'd hung where he'd see it every single day. She'd be 53 this year, he said. He said it the way you'd report the weather in a country you were exiled from and would never see again. I didn't ask. I'd learned that too. You don't pull the thread. You let them feed it out at the speed they can stand. I poured the coffee and I sat down across from him and I waited, and outside the rain began to ease, and Emmett Vance told me the thing the whole town had spent 40 years inventing wrong. Ruth died having their second child, he said. The baby died too, a boy. It happened fast, and it happened in 1971 in a county with one doctor and a long road, and there was nothing to be done and everything to be blamed. And Emmett, 29, back from a war he wouldn't discuss, holding a 5-year-old girl and 2 coffins, did the arithmetic of grief that a certain kind of man does. He decided the world had shown him what it did to things he loved, and he decided the only way to keep Cora safe from that world was to hold on hard. I got afraid, he said. That's the whole of it, though it took me 40 years to say the word. People think I went mad. I didn't go mad. I went afraid, and I stayed there so long it looked like the same thing. He raised her alone on the ranch. He taught her to ride, to shoot, to read weather, to fix an engine. You could see her whole education on the walls of that room, a girl being made into someone who could survive anything. But fear is a poison that wears the mask of love, and the tighter he held her, the more the holding became a cage. He wouldn't let her stay in town after dark, wouldn't let her take the job in Tucson, wouldn't let her marry the boy she loved, a good boy, he admitted now, a decent boy, he could see it now, 40 years too late. Because the boy wanted to take her to Colorado, and Colorado was far, and far was where the world took things from you. She told me I'd rather bury her safe than let her live somewhere I couldn't watch, he said. She was 19, she was right. God, she was right, and I couldn't hear it. Cora left anyway. Of course she did. That's what the loved and the caged do, they leave, because the leaving is the only way left to prove they're alive. She left in the night with a suitcase and the boy from Colorado and a note on the kitchen table, and Emmett, afraid, always afraid, fear curdled all the way into cruelty by then, said a thing to the closing door that he would spend the rest of his life unable to take back. He wouldn't tell me what it was. To this day I don't know, but I know the shape of it from the shape of the hole it left. He'd told his daughter, in fear dressed as fury, that if she walked out that door she needn't come back, and she believed him, and she didn't. She wrote, he said, first few years I didn't answer. He said this looking at his hands, those hands that couldn't grip a wrench anymore, that had built a crib and a coffin and framed a crayon drawing. Pride, you call it pride, but pride's just fear wearing a nicer hat. I kept thinking next letter. I'll answer the next one. I'll wait till I'm not so angry, till I know what to say. He turned his coffee cup a slow quarter turn on the table, a gesture I'd seen him make 100 times and never understood was grief. The letters got further apart, then they stopped, and I told myself she'd stopped caring because that was easier than the truth. What was the truth? I asked. Gently, I already half knew. That she was waiting for me to be her father again, he said. And I let her wait until she stopped. The mare, Sugar, the one that died in the dust my first real day out there, had been Cora's. Emmett had kept her alive 31 years, long past when a horse should go, past when it was kind, because Sugar was the last living thing that had known his daughter. He'd been keeping her the way you keep a photograph. And when she died, he'd knelt in the dirt and said goodbye not just to a horse, but to the last warm proof that the girl on the wall had ever been real. I'd walked into the middle of that my first week, and not understood a thing I was looking at. That's why you took it so hard, I said. That's why I take everything hard, he said. There's only so much a man can bury before the burying is all he knows how to do. I want to stop here and tell you what this did to me, because I promised at the start that I had a stake in this, and you're owed the truth of it. I had left a marriage. That's the clean version I gave the town. The real version is that I'd stayed in a marriage that was quietly killing something in me for 6 years because I was afraid of the far country too, afraid of the life on the other side of the door I wouldn't open, and I'd only left when leaving became less frightening than staying. And I had a mother in Phoenix I hadn't spoken to in 2 years over a fight so stupid I could no longer remember its exact shape, only its heat. We were both waiting, she and I. Each of us waiting for the other to be the first to be sorry. Each of us telling ourselves the other had stopped caring because it was easier than the truth. I sat across from Emmett Vance, and I understood that I was looking at my own future if I wasn't careful. Here was a man 40 years down the road I was standing at the head of. Here was where the waiting went. Here was the house you ended up in, walls stripped bare, one room sealed, one crayon drawing framed, a whole life spent guarding the ashes of the moment you were too afraid to be the first to reach across the table. Emmett, I said, my voice wasn't working right. Where is she now? And that was the question. That was the thing I'd walked toward without knowing it. Because he looked at me, And for the first time since I'd known him, the old man was afraid in a way that had nothing to do with his heart or his hands. And he said the truest and most terrible thing I ever heard him say. "I don't know," he said. "I've been afraid to find out, because if I find out she's gone, then I killed her twice. And if I find out she's alive—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "If she's alive, then it was always my move to make, and I never made it, and I'll have to know that with whatever time I've got left." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my grandmother's old bed with the notebook on my chest, and I thought about the two of us, Emmett and me, 2 houses with the furniture gone, 2 people who'd let fear teach them that the closed door was safer than the open one. And somewhere around 3 in the morning I got angry. Not at him. At the whole machinery of it, the pride and the fear and the waiting, the way it eats a person's whole life one deferred letter at a time. I thought about my mother's number, still in my phone after 2 years, untouched, a door I walked past 100 times a day. I thought someone has to be the first one to reach across the table. That's the whole thing. That's the entire mechanism of it. It just needs one person willing to be the first and to risk that the reaching won't be met. And I thought I could find her. I have his name, her name, the boy from Colorado, the year they left. I do this kind of searching for a living. Half of home care is paperwork and locating people. I could find Cora Vance. And then the harder thought, the one that kept me up till the window went gray. But what if I find her and she's dead, and I've killed him with it? What if I find her and she won't speak to him, and I've handed a dying man a final proof that it's too late? What if the kindest thing is to leave the door closed? That was the morally heavy thing, the decision I'd been circling this whole story. Because I could tell myself it was Emmett's choice to make, and it truly was. I had no right. I'd already learned what happens when I decide I have the right to someone's closed rooms. But I also knew the man. I knew he would never make the call. Fear had him. Fear had had him for 40 years, and it wasn't going to let go in the 18 months the doctor gave him. If the door was going to open, someone else was going to have to be the first hand on the knob, and then live with whatever was behind it. I want to be honest about something. I've told this story a few times over the years, and people always want me to be sure. They want me to say I knew in my heart it was right. I didn't know. I've never known. I made the choice the way you make the real ones, in the dark, frightened, without a guarantee, betting a person's last chance on the possibility that reaching is better than waiting, even when the reaching might break what's left. In the morning I made coffee. Emmett came in slow, lowered himself into his chair, turned the cup a quarter turn. "I want to ask you something," I said, "and I want you to know you can tell me no, and I'll never bring it up again." He looked at me. Something in my face must have told him. Old men who have spent 40 years afraid can smell a door about to open. "You want to find her," he said. "I want to try." The rain had stopped in the night. The desert outside the window was that shocked bright green it only goes for a week after real rain, everything that had been waiting underground for years suddenly, recklessly alive. He looked out at it a long time. Blue's tags jingled somewhere in the yard. The old clock on the bare wall ticked. "If she's alive," he said, and stopped, started again. "If she's alive and she won't see me, you don't hide it from me to be kind, you hear? I've had 40 years of the kind lie I told myself. I don't want another one at the end." "I won't lie to you," I said, "whatever I find." He nodded, once, and then Emmett Vance, the mad cowboy, the terror of Redfield Road, put his shaking hand flat on the kitchen table, palm up, the way you do when you've decided at last to be the one who reaches first, even though it's 40 years too late and might already be for nothing. "Then find my girl," he said. Finding her took 11 days, and I aged a year in every one of them. I did it at night after Emmett was asleep, at my grandmother's kitchen table with a laptop and the bad country internet, and everything I knew how to do. It's not glamorous work finding a person. It's marriage records and property filings and the small immortal footprints people leave in the world without meaning to. Cora Vance had married the boy from Colorado. His name was Daniel Reyes, in the spring of 1974 in a courthouse in Durango. That told me the leaving had held. That told me she'd gotten her far country after all. And then the trail did the thing I'd been afraid of. It thinned. It went quiet through the 80s. And in 1991 there was a record that stopped my heart for the length of time it took me to read it fully, because the word deceased appeared, and for one long horrible moment I thought I'd found the thing that would kill Emmett, until I read the name attached to it and saw it was Daniel. Daniel Reyes died 1991, 44 years old, not Cora. Cora had been widowed young in the far country with, I kept reading, my hands not quite steady, with 2 children, a daughter and a son. Emmett had grandchildren. Emmett had grandchildren and didn't know their names. I found her current address on the 9th night. She was living outside Montrose, Colorado, which is high country, cold country, the exact far and dangerous elsewhere he'd tried to save her from, and she'd been living there safely for 50 years, raising children, burying a husband, becoming someone with a whole life he'd refused every letter that might have told him about. She was 53 years old. She was alive. She was a 2-day drive away, and she had been that whole time, the entire 40 years, close enough to reach and impossibly far, the way the people were too afraid to call always are. I sat in the dark with her address on the screen, and I did not feel triumph. I felt terror, because now I had it. Now the door was mine to open or not, and every consequence past this point was a thing I'd chosen. I didn't call her. I want to explain why, because it matters. I thought about it for 2 days. A phone call is a door you slam in someone's face just by picking it up wrong. Hi, you don't know me. I take care of your father, the one who told you not to come back. How does that call go? Every version I ran in my head ended with a click and a woman in Montrose deciding that whatever this was, she'd survived 40 years without it and didn't need it now. So I wrote a letter instead, and I made a decision I've never fully forgiven or fully regretted. I didn't write it as me. I signed my name. I told her the truth of who I was, but I enclosed something. I'd gone back into that sealed room with Emmett's permission this time, both of us standing in the dust and tin horses, and I'd taken the crayon drawing off the kitchen wall, M.E. and Daddy, and I'd photographed it, and I put that photograph in the envelope with 3 lines in my own hand. Your father is 81, and his heart is failing. He kept this on his kitchen wall for 40 years where he'd see it every day. He is too afraid and too proud to ask, so I'm asking for him. He is sorry. He has always been sorry. He just didn't know how to be the first one to say it. I didn't tell Emmett I'd sent it. That was another thing I had no right to do. I've done a lot in this story I had no right to do. I've made peace with the fact that love, the real kind, the kind with no good name, sometimes requires you to trespass. I put the letter in the box at the end of Redfield Road, and I raised the little red flag, and I drove back to the ranch, and I threw up in the yard quietly where Emmett wouldn't hear. And then we waited. And waiting, as this whole story has been trying to tell you, is the thing that kills you slowest. Nothing came for 2 weeks. Emmett got worse in those 2 weeks, the way people do when their body knows something is ending even if their mind won't say it. He slept more. He ate less. He'd sit on the porch in the evenings with Blue's head on his boot and look down the road, and I'd pretend I didn't know what he was looking for, and he'd pretend he wasn't looking, and we'd sit in the enormous shared lie that we'd both stopped hoping. I stopped sleeping almost entirely. I'd sent a dying man's last chance into the world in a paper envelope, and now I couldn't call it back. And every day the mailbox was empty, I understood a little more that I might have done a terrible thing. That I might have to watch him die having reached at last at 81 across the table and finding no one there. That would be worse than never reaching. I'd taken his 40-year-old wound and reopened it in his last month so it could bleed fresh. What have I done? I wrote in the notebook, over and over, the only true thing some of those days. What have I done? On the 16th day, a car I didn't recognize turned off the county road onto Redfield. I was hanging wash. I remember that. I remember the specific weight of a wet shirt in my hands and the dust the car raised and the way Blue lifted his head and didn't bark. That old healer who barked at everything, who'd barked the day Sugar died, went silent and still and watched the car come like he knew. Like the dog knew before either of us did. It was a woman, 53, but she looked younger, weathered the way mountain people are, and she got out of the car slow and stood beside it with her hand on the door like she might get back in, and I knew her before I saw her face because I'd been staring at her for weeks on a wall. She had the girl on the pony's exact set to her jaw. She had, God help all of us, Emmett's eyes. Behind her in the car were 2 younger people, the grandchildren. She'd brought the grandchildren. She looked at me across the yard, this stranger who'd sent her a photograph of her own childhood, and her face was doing something I have no words adequate for 40 years of a locked door standing in a dusty yard trying to decide whether to knock. Is he inside? She said, her voice shook. It was unmistakably his voice, that same gravel. He's on the porch, I said. He's on the porch every evening. He's been... And I couldn't finish it. He's been watching the road, so I just stepped aside. I'm not going to tell you everything about what happened on that porch. Some doors, once they're open, aren't mine to narrate. There are things a daughter and the father who failed her have to say and unsay to each other that don't belong in any story, not even this one. But I'll tell you what I saw from the yard, because I couldn't help but see it, and because it's the thing I most want you to carry away from all of this. I saw Emmett Vance stand up out of his chair without his cane, which he could not do, which he had not done in the whole time I'd known him. I saw a dying 81-year-old man stand up out of pure disbelief, one hand going to the porch post to hold himself, and I saw him say one word, her name, Cora, the same way he'd said it to the dying mare and the same way he'd said it in his fever. Reaching, always reaching, 40 years of reaching finally with something at the end of it. And I saw her come up the porch steps slow, one at a time, a woman climbing toward the exact thing she'd been told never to come back to, and I saw her stop in front of him close enough to touch and not touch him yet, the two of them just standing there in the failing gold light like they didn't dare. Like they'd each spent 40 years so certain the other had stopped caring that being wrong about it was almost too much to survive. And then I saw her say something I couldn't hear, and I saw him break. The whole granite mad cowboy edifice of him, the man who ran nurses off with coffee mugs, who stood on porches with rifles, who'd buried a wife and a son and a daughter and 31 years of horse. I watched it come down all at once, and I watched his daughter catch him. This small, weathered mountain woman holding up her enormous, ruined father on a porch in the last light, both of them making sounds that weren't words, and I turned away. I turned away because some things you don't get to watch. I picked up my basket of wet wash and I walked around the side of the house, and I sat down in the dirt with my back against the wall, in the exact spot I realized later where I'd sat the day the mare died, and I put my face in my hands. The two grandchildren were still standing uncertainly by the car. The girl, she was maybe 20, came and found me there. She didn't say anything. She just sat down in the dirt next to me, a stranger, and after a while she said, "You're the one who sent the picture." Not a question. I nodded. She was quiet again. Then she said, "Mom's talked about him our whole lives." She said he was the strongest man she ever knew, and she never understood why the strong ones can't ever just. And she stopped, and she didn't finish it, and she didn't need to. Why the strong ones can't ever just. I've thought about that unfinished sentence more than almost anything else in my life. Emmett lived 14 more months. The doctor had said 18 and was wrong, but the doctor didn't know about the porch. Cora came back 3 more times before the end, and the last time she came for good, moving into the house with the bare walls, and one of the first things she did was go into the sealed room at the end of the hall and open the window that hadn't been opened in 40 years. I helped her carry the photographs out. We hung them all through the house, on all the empty walls, the whole archaeology of a life he'd hidden away, Ruth laughing, the baby, the girl on the pony, and new ones now, the grandchildren, until the house that had been stripped bare was covered wall to wall with proof that these people had loved each other and survived it. The crayon drawing went back on the kitchen wall. Me and Daddy. Cora cried when she saw he'd kept it. She'd forgotten she ever drew it. He'd remembered it every single day for 40 years. I stayed on as his caretaker to the end, though the truth is Cora did most of it, and my job became something else, became witness, I suppose. Became the person who'd been there for the middle of it, the sealed years, the ones she'd missed. Sometimes in the evenings, the 3 of us would sit on that porch and he'd tell stories, and he laughed more in those 14 months than the town swears he laughed in the previous 40, and Blue would put his head on somebody's boot, and I'd think about how close it had come to never happening. How it had all hung on a paper envelope and a raised red flag and my own trespassing, terrified hands. He died in the spring in the house, with his daughter holding one hand and me holding the other, and the last thing he said was to her, and it was her name, the way he always said it, reaching, except this time she was already there, already holding on, and he knew it. And I watched a man leave the world having finally been the one who reached first and been met. I called my mother from the parking lot of the funeral home. I want you to know that. I've been carrying it the whole 14 months, the lesson of it, and I kept not doing it, kept telling myself next week. When I'm not so tired, when I know what to say, the exact machinery, the exact deferred letter, and I'd catch myself doing it and be ashamed. And then I stood in a gravel parking lot in a black dress with the desert going green around me, and I understood that I had watched a man spend 40 years learning this lesson so completely that it nearly ate his whole life. And if I didn't call my mother right then, standing there, I would have watched it for nothing. She picked up on the 4th ring. She said my name like a question, like she didn't dare hope it was really me. I don't remember exactly what I said. I remember it wasn't eloquent. I remember I was crying too hard to be eloquent. And I remember that after a moment she was crying too, 2,000 years of stupid, stubborn silence coming down all at once. And I remember that neither of us said sorry in any clean, quotable way. We just both started talking at the same time, over each other, desperate, reaching, the way you do when the door finally opens and you can't get through it fast enough. That was Emmett's real gift to me, not the wages, not even the 14 months of getting to know a good, difficult man. He taught me the whole terrible mechanism of it, and then he let me watch him beat it at the very last possible second so that I'd know it could be beaten, so that I wouldn't wait 40 years, so that I wouldn't end up a house with the furniture gone, guarding a sealed room. People in town still call him the mad cowboy. The story didn't change just because the truth did. Stories rarely do. They still tell children about the strange old man who talked to dead horses, and I let them mostly. I've learned you can't unmake a legend by arguing with it. But sometimes, when someone's kind enough to really ask, when someone new comes to town and hears the story and something in them doesn't quite believe it, I tell them what I told you. I tell them he wasn't mad. I tell them he was afraid, and he stayed there so long it looked like the same thing. I tell them about the crib he built by hand, and the letters he couldn't answer, and the mare he kept alive 31 years because she'd known his daughter. I tell them the strong ones can't ever just, and then I let them finish it themselves, the way that girl did in the dirt beside me, because some sentences you have to complete on your own or they don't take. And if they ask me what I discovered out at the Vance place, the thing that changed everything, I don't tell them about the sealed room. That's not really it. What I discovered is that there's a moment in every love that's gone quiet where the whole thing hangs on one person being brave enough to be the first to reach across the table, and that the moment doesn't announce itself, and that it doesn't wait forever. And that most of the grief in this world isn't the loud kind, the kind the town makes stories about. It's the quiet kind, the deferred kind, the letter you'll answer next week for 40 years. I raised Wash off a line and watched a dog go still and a car come up a dusty road, and I learned that it's almost never too late, right up until the one time it is. I called my mother from a parking lot in a black dress. Don't wait as long as I almost did.